Hi, this is Shupriyo, and today we are going to talk about Brexit. The UK has finally left the European Union after 47 years. So why did this happen? What is the European Union? What is the Eurozone? Why did the UK want to leave? And why did it take so long? And what is the future repercussion of this thing? Let's find out in this video. So the first thing that we need to understand is the meaning of Brexit. So what is Brexit? It's basically short for British exit. So the exit of the UK. So it refers to the withdrawal of UK from the European Union. So the UK has left the European Union via the Brexit. Now, before we get into the Brexit specifications, we need to understand what is the European Union. The EU. So the European Union is basically a political and economic union of erstwhile 28 member states. Now it has gone down to 27 because the UK has effectively left it. So these 28 member states, they have two important things which are quite ingrained, which are quite integral to the EU. So these are the single market and the customs union. So what happens in these two things? The European Union has a single market. So this means that the free circulation of goods, capital, people and services can be done within the EU. So it permits the free movement of these things within the EU, and that is why we call the EU as a single market. Now, how is this different to a customs union? So a customs union is basically that a common external tariff will be put on all the goods which are entering the EU. So the EU is consolidated into one entity, into one customs block, and this customs block, there are tariffs on entering this customs block. So whenever any country has any external good enter into that, if it is within the EU, it is treated as a single customs block. So this single customs block is free to decide the rate of the tariffs. So basically, for example, if you have cars, for example, so there is a 10% tariff on cars, all the cars which are being imported into the European Union. So the customs union makes it so that all the tariffs are laid uniformly on all of the member states of the European Union. So that's all about this. And the third thing is, it's actually a lot of different other things for the European Union. So there are the European Court of Justice, there's the European Parliament and many other things. So these are also integral things about the European Union, and the European Union also has a separate treatment for its financial institutions and for free movement of the people. So basically, a person who is resident in the EU can go ahead and go reside in the UK with a minimal amount of paperwork, a minimal amount of hurdles to that effect. So it allows the entire region to have free trade and a basic economic and political union of sorts. So it's important to remember that the first talks for the European Union had started in 1958 and a lot of the countries were involved, but the final shape was taken in 1992 under the Maastricht Treaty. So this Maastricht Treaty, actually there were many different treaties. There was the Rome Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, etc, etc. So those are a lot more. We do not need to go into such technical details, but you can remember the Maastricht Treaty because that was the final treaty which caused the formation of the European Union. And the UK joined the European Union in 1973. So it was a little bit late to join. At that time, it did not used to be called the European Union, and it is the first country that is leaving. So I'll put a picture so that you can see all of the members of the EU and all of the states, the member states that are in the EU. And you also have to remember another thing, that there are certain non-EU members, for example Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. So these four countries, they participate in the single market but not in the customs union. So the free movement of the people, that single market thing, free movement of goods, of people, of capital, etc, etc, that are being included in these four countries like the EU, but the customs union is not followed there. So basically those tariffs that I talked about, that's not uniform for these countries. And another thing is that there are few countries which are member of only the customs union and not the single market. So this customs union and the single market, they are actually different entities within the EU, and the countries can go ahead and become a member of that they can pick and choose if they want to become a member of that. So Turkey, Andorra and Isle of Man, these have become members of the customs union and not the single market. And another very integral thing to understand this whole process is the Eurozone. So what is the Eurozone? The Eurozone is a subset of the European Union. Now the Eurozone is basically the monetary union of 19 out of these 28 countries. So I'll put up a picture so that you can see these 19 countries which are part of the Eurozone, the monetary union, and they are also part of the EU and the Eurozone at the same time. And these countries, they must necessarily use the euro as their common currency. So this is quite important. You can only become a part of this monetary union if you agree to use the European currency or the euro. That is very important. And you must note that the UK does not have the membership for this. So the UK, as you know, it uses the pound sterling, right? And it does not use the euro. So the UK has picked and chosen various different things. In fact, the UK is the only country which was allowed to pick and choose a lot of the things. Even there is something called the rebate. We'll get to it a little bit later, which only the UK has. So the UK had a very preferable position in the European Union. And now we come to why the UK actually wants to leave. So we see that the UK is actually getting a lot of things. So why does it actually want to leave? What's the main problem? So to understand this main problem, this did not happen overnight. So you have to go back far back. So in 1973, when the UK actually entered the European Union, there were various Eurosceptics and people who did not want to be part of the EU. And even in 1975, there was a referendum that was held at that point of time. And at that time, the people voted to remain in the European Union. They did not want to exit. So why suddenly the UK wants to leave? There are many reasons for it. And the first reason is the economic and the political independence. So you have to understand that the European Union, which is headquartered, by the way, in Brussels. So basically, the laws that are framed, the EU laws which are framed in Brussels, they actually override the individual laws of the member states. So for example, if there are two laws, if there is a UK law and there is a Brussels law, the EU law, so the EU law is going to take precedence. So whenever there is a kind of conflict, then only the EU law is going to override. So this is something that is not very good for the country, and it is not good for the economic and the political independence aspect, because the EU laws are constraining your country. So you cannot have 100% freedom. So this is a contentious issue, and it dragged for a long amount of time, and it came to the forefront in the Brexit vote. And there was also a lot of Euroscepticism. So the Euroscepticism is basically the skepticism of the British people to not be a part of the European Union. And there is a very important political party that we must talk about, which is the UK Independence Party, the UKIP. So the UKIP, it gradually became very favorable with the British voters, and it became the party to get the most number of votes in the 2014 elections. So it got the first place. So UKIP, it actually drove the agenda on the Euroscepticism front as well. And the other thing which was quite publicized during the Brexit vote is the high membership fees. So you used to have these red buses which would drive around London and all across the UK, and they would actually tell the common people about the high fees which were being paid by the UK. So for the EU budget, so the European Union, they have a separate budget, and each member country needs to contribute some amount in that budget. And in 2018, the net amount that the UK had to pay for this budget was around 9 billion pounds. So that's a huge amount, and we must understand that the UK, they actually paid 13 billion pounds, and out of that 4 billion pounds were used by the EU for policies or for some things which were going to take place in the UK. So effectively 4 billion pounds came back to the UK, and so effectively the rate was 9 billion pounds. Now you have to understand something here, which is the rebate. And the UK, it actually had a very complex system for this EU budget. It was put into place at the time of Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, as you know, one of the previous prime ministers of UK. UK. So at that time, what she had done, she had secured for the UK a rebate. So right now, due to the rebate, the UK had to pay less amount, at least 4 billion pounds less. So if the UK actually did not have this rebate, then they would have to pay 17 billion pounds. So instead they paid 13 billion pounds and they effectively got back 4 billion pounds, and the net amount that they had to pay was just 9 billion pounds. So it was easier for them. But even then, it is a huge number, and the citizens of the UK think that it's not feasible for them to continue paying this amount year after year. So it's not something that they wanted. They wanted freedom from this aspect. And also another important thing which actually took the center stage after the 2008 crisis, it was the joining of the Eurozone. So the British people, they did not want to abandon the pound sterling, and especially after the Greek crisis. So after the global financial crisis of 2008 had hit, the contagion effect, it actually spread to the EU as well. And at that point of time, there was a huge crisis in Greece, and as you know, it is called the European debt crisis. So because of the European debt crisis, the euro was hit a lot, and at that point of time, the UK people thought that okay, because our currency is different, we are not getting hit so much. But a policy was later on framed that by 2020, all of the European Union members had to go ahead and accept the Eurozone. So they had to accept the euro as their currency, and the British people didn't want that. They didn't want to get into the Eurozone, and so they said that okay, we do not want to get into the Eurozone, don't force us. And it also became one of the other reasons for not wanting to stay in the EU. And another final important part is the immigration thing. So anti-immigration sentiment, it has become a very important and central theme in UK politics. And what happened was that because of some EU laws, all of these refugees and all of these people from the EU used to go for better life opportunities and stay in the UK. So there used to be a lot of immigration to the UK. So what happened essentially was that UK was forced to change some laws. So they imposed a 4-year limit on getting the UK benefits and the housing. So as you can understand, because they do not want the influx of so many people into their country, so they imposed some limitations on that. But the EU overruled it. The EU was opposed to those things. So the British people thought that okay, this is something that is getting very difficult for us. We are not even allowed to set the own rules for immigration. It's our country. So people are coming from outside and we have to abide by the EU laws. So this is not fair, right? So all of these things, it actually created a lot of resentment within the British people. However, you have to understand that this is not something that happened overnight. It happened over a long period of time. And you'll see that their decision, the actual decision that happened for leaving the European Union, it was via a public vote back in June 2016. So this was called a referendum. A public referendum was held whereby 51.89% of the UK voted to leave the EU and 48.11% voted to remain. So as you can see, this is a highly divisive vote. Only 52% to 48%. So can you understand? People were so divided. They did not understand. And you have to understand the actual consequences of that thing, because people did not have the correct information as well to make that decision. And at that point of time, the Prime Minister of the UK was David Cameron, and he was under a lot of pressure because people were calling for a referendum, and he effectively told that okay, I will put a question to the people of the UK that do you want to stay in the European Union or do you want to leave? So this was the only question. They were handed pieces of paper and they were asked this question. So this is how the vote actually happened. And some people later on said that the people were not given enough time and enough information to make the decision. So as you understand, it was a very divisive vote. Imagine, it was almost a 50-50, 52 to 48. So at that point of time, after all of these things happened, the Prime Minister David Cameron, he had to resign, and it led to a huge crisis, a political crisis as well. And you must also remember, like I mentioned earlier on, that the first referendum on the EU membership, it was held in 1975 in the UK, and at that point of time 67% had voted to remain. And in this recent 2016 one, there was only 48% who voted to remain. So an interesting tidbit is that in RBI 2016 exam in phase 2, they had asked asked the exact percentage. So you understand all of these important international events are very, very essential to learn for the RBI. So you need to understand and you need to remember the figures as well. And the another thing is, why is it taking so long? Now 2016 is the referendum, right? So why are we having it right now? Why not earlier? So original date for the Brexit vote, it was 29th March 2019, but it was delayed thrice actually. So twice it was delayed under Theresa May, who was the prime minister that succeeded David Cameron, and once it was delayed under Boris Johnson, who is the current prime minister. So Theresa May, she came to office after David Cameron had left, and as the new PM, she invoked Article 50. So Article 50 was something under the Lisbon Treaty of the European Union, and it told the country which wants to leave the European Union, it has around 2 years to leave, to make all the arrangements so that it can leave. So Article 50 was actually invoked by her in 2017. She wanted to have a kind of deal which was known as the Theresa May's deal, and she made a lot of negotiations. However, May's deal actually lost the vote thrice. So why did it actually lose? So it is because of very, very complex situations, but one of the most important things is regarding the Irish backstop. Now you have to understand by looking at the map. Basically Northern Ireland is a part of the UK, okay? However, the Republic of Ireland, that is not a part of the UK. So what happened a long time ago, there was a political crisis. There was something called the Irish Republican Army as well, and interestingly, you will note that the last Viceroy of India, do you remember him? Lord Mountbatten? Yes, Lord Mountbatten was actually killed by an IRA bombing. So you understand, it was a very sensitive issue, and this issue between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland was at the center stage in this Brexit vote. And because this peace, it was brokered in the 1990s, there was something called the Good Friday Agreement, and by that they actually had peace in this place. Earlier there used to be terrorism also, so people were very afraid that what will happen if the Brexit happens, because the Republic of Ireland, it's going to stay within the EU, and the Northern Ireland, it's going to actually leave, because UK is going to leave, right? So at that point of time, Theresa May, she had this idea of a Irish backstop. It was between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So May's deal effectively said that there will be no border posts or barriers there, and there will be free trade movement. But people actually rejected this, many people, because they said that, okay, we had voted to leave, now you are saying that trade will be flowing through there, and so are we going to bow down to the EU rules? So there was a huge outcry, and the UK Parliament, there was heated arguments in that, and people did not listen to her, and 3 times their vote was done, and 3 times she actually lost it, and even there was a no confidence motion against her, but Theresa May actually won that, but her vote was not passed at all. On the 3rd loss of her vote of the May's deal, she finally could not do it any longer, and she gave up, she resigned, and finally the elections were held. So Theresa May was out of the picture. Now into the picture comes Boris Johnson, the next prime minister and the current prime minister of the UK. So he actually came after Theresa May. There was a general election, and he got a huge win. He's from the Conservative Party. They got a huge majority, and Boris Johnson, what he did, he actually rode the Brexit wave, you can say, and he said that, okay, I will get Brexit done. So this was his pitch, basically his political pitch. And right now what he has done, he has actually a little bit changed this Irish backstop thing. So this Irish backstop, this thing, it has actually been changed by the Boris Johnson thing. So Boris Johnson, what he said is that there is going to be a customs border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and tariffs will be paid on goods entering Northern Ireland but refunded if they stayed there. So what does that mean? This means that whenever there will be any goods which are moving from the UK to Northern Ireland, from the mainland of UK to Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is also part of the UK. So when the goods will be moving there taxes will need to be paid. However, if the goods are going to stay in Northern Ireland, then you do not have to pay the taxes. Effectively, you will get a refund of those taxes. But if they are moved to the Republic of Ireland, then you have to pay the taxes. So this is how he actually solved the issue. And there are some contentions as well, but it's mostly solved now. So right now, what is the situation? Is the UK fully out of the EU? Well, we can say yes and no, because on January 31st, 2020, UK has officially left the EU. So people are saying that Brexit has been done. However, for the next 11 months, there is going to be a transition period or an implementation period. So these are the two important things: transition period or implementation period, which will be continuing. And this will culminate in a deal or no deal on 31st December 2020. So effectively, even though January 31st was the big Brexit date and the UK has left, but still they are going to be following all EU regulations. They are going to be making the same payments. So everything remains the same. So on 31st December 2020, all of these things will have to end, and there has to be a kind of a plan. So what is the kind of plan that is going to happen after 31st December 2020? So there are three scenarios. So the first scenario is a soft Brexit. Now a soft Brexit, this is something like Norway. So when I talk about like Norway, so this is something like the Norway deal with the EU. So what is a soft Brexit? A soft Brexit basically says that very few things will change. The UK will still have access to the single market, to the customs union, and they will also have some membership of the European Court of Justice, etc., etc. So softer Brexit means that fewer and fewer things will change. So most of the control will not be acquired back by the UK. So many of the people, as you can understand, understandably they do not like this, because this will defeat the whole purpose of the referendum. The next option is the hard Brexit. So this is something like Canada's trade deal with the EU. So this is a Canada type FTA. Now a hard Brexit means that Britain will have a much more pronounced exit from the European Union, and they will leave the single market and the customs union, etc., etc. So the UK will effectively have to make its own FTA, a free trade agreement with the EU, and it is something that is going to be like Canada. So basically the deal, the Canada type FTA, this is basically a deal whereby 98% of goods between Canada and EU27 is the EU, the European Union without the Brexit. So these things became duty free. It is also called the CETA, which is the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. So this CETA is the deal that Canada has with the European Union, and the UK wants that they are going to also create this kind of a deal with the EU. And the EU, however, does not want this, because as you can understand, because UK is leaving the EU and they are also wanting a good deal, you can understand that the EU will not want it, because the EU wants to effectively have some repercussions for the UK because they are leaving. So if they leave smoothly, it is not going to be good for the EU, you understand. So they actually do not want this. However, if these things do not happen, there can be a scenario like the no deal, and the no deal is like Australia. So this is the Australia and the EU relationship. So no deal means that the UK is going to crash out of the European Union, and many things will be changing, and it will have a very serious repercussion for any of the citizens who are living in the United Kingdom, who are actually EU citizens, and for all the UK citizens who are living in the European Union. So they will not be protected, and their rights will not be protected at that point of time. They will have to be deported back sometimes, and there will be checks at the border, and there will be a whole lot of issues. So a no deal Brexit, it will be very, very disastrous for the economy, and there are dire repercussions if that kind of thing happens. So what's the future going to be like? So first, before we talk about the future, you have to understand that the UK is actually made up of 4 countries. It is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So this is a complex situation that the UK is in, and this becomes even more complicated because of Scotland. Now why is that? It's because Scotland effectively did not want to leave the European Union, but it was forced because the UK voted, right? However, in Scotland, 62% of the Scottish public had voted to remain. So because of this, the Scottish public is very angry, because they told that, okay, we must be within the EU for our future benefit, and this is why they want a second Scottish referendum. Now what is a Scottish referendum? A Scottish referendum is basically a referendum on the independence of Scotland from the UK. So just like the UK wanted to leave the European Union, so Scotland now wants to leave the UK. So as you can understand, it's causing a huge chaos. And actually the last Scottish referendum was held in 2014, whereby 55% of the Scots had voted to remain in the UK. So at that time they had voted to remain. However, after this Brexit vote, the public has changed its opinion, and because in the 2016 Brexit vote they had overwhelmingly voted to remain, right? Scotland had voted to remain, and now they are calling for a second Scottish referendum. And their Prime Minister Nicola Sturgeon, she is also actually trying to get a call for second Scottish referendum, and she is saying that we need to think about it because Scotland effectively wants to remain in the EU. And many prominent experts have said that it could take 10 years for all of the trade deals to be done with the European Union, between the UK and the European Union. So because the European Union is the largest trading partner of the UK, the future of trade deals is going to determine the economic impact of Brexit. So it is very important to get those free trade deals, but many experts are saying that it could take up to 10 years to get that done. So this will be a huge problem for Britain, for UK. And even the Bank of England governor Mark Carney, he had warned of huge shocks to the economy in case of a no-deal Brexit. And the Bank of England had also said that if there is a no-deal Brexit, then it will be hugely disastrous to the British economy. And effectively, there is going to be the end of the London's financial dominance, because right now, as you understand, in all the financial estimates rankings, in all the global rankings, the top finance center is New York and the second finance center is London. So now, because of Brexit, already 300 financial firms, they have left London because they do not want to deal with this Brexit phenomenon. And the thing is that many of the asset managers, they are moving to Dublin, and many of the stock market operators, they are moving to Amsterdam, and many of the bankers, they are moving to Frankfurt. So all of these three cities which are outside the UK and in the European Union, they are getting a lot of prominence. So New York effectively does not lose. New York is going to stay and it's going to remain very powerful. And some estimates are that $1 trillion could effectively leave Britain. So this is very serious implication for Britain. And also the medical supplies are at risk, and all exporting firms will be hit, because as you understand, like exporting firms, they need to compete with the EU. So right now, if the tariffs will be increased on them, they cannot effectively compete, right? So Brexit is basically going to impact the exporters and the domestic firms differently, because if there is a domestic manufacturer, for example, if I sell furniture only in the UK and I had to compete with French furniture or German furniture, etc., then it would have been very good for me if those competitions can be eliminated. Brexit will effectively end those competitions, and so the domestic manufacturer, he will actually like Brexit. However, the person who is exporting, he will be subject to tariffs, right? And he cannot go ahead and compete, and that is why exporters will be hit. And medicine supplies are at risk because enough medicines might not be in the UK. They might have to be imported from the EU, and there might be border patrols and many different things to get through. And another thing is that the positive basically is that more autonomy will be acquired by the UK over its borders. So immigration policies, it can set its own immigration policies. It can decide who it wants to let in, who it does not want to let in, etc. And the laws and the freedom will be there to craft UK favored policies. So UK favored policies will get an impetus because of Brexit. Effectively, they can decide their own future. And so finally, we come to the relationship with India. So the relationship with India, the outlook is that it's going to be positive, and a new free trade agreement is going to be signed with the vital trade partner being India. So the EU regulations won't be followed and it will become less bureaucratic. So what this will do is that the UK and India, they can sit at the table and they can discuss and they can exchange ideas and sign the free trade deal. So they do not need to consult the EU, and so this will lead to much faster operations, and it might ultimately be a lot beneficial for India because we'll be getting a favorable trade agreement. We will not have to think about all the EU regulations. So people are saying it will be positive. Brexit is going to be positive for us, but whether it is going to be positive for the UK, time is going to tell. There are various opinions and I have put them down in front of you. So I hope that you enjoyed this session and that it was beneficial to you. Please subscribe if you want to see more, and please share this video with your friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.